Hello everyone! Welcome to this review! It has occurred to me that while I have plenty of notes with which to talk about this game, I have not properly planned out a way to introduce this review. But this review is for A Light in the Sky, which is a game for RPG Maker 3. And if you did not know that it was for RPG Maker 3, then that means you have not seen the Let's Play yet, in which case you'll probably want to look at the Let's Play, because this is not going to be a spoiler-free review. I will give one spoiler-free part though, and that part is this: the game was good. On to the spoilerific stuff now. Now, just a fair warning, there is going to be a lot of criticism as I go through this review. That does not mean the game is bad. I just said that I like the game. The game is good. It just so happens that complaining about things is a lot easier than praising things. Of course, there are going to be some things which I will praise, or at least give compliments for. So let's get started with the very thing that I want to complain about the most: the curses. First off, they didn't affect me as a player. They were just sort of there. The biggest curse that should have affected me was the perpetual night, because that was the very thing that was the catalyst for this entire quest. There had been night for 3 whole months, and we go out and try to figure out what's going on with the curse. And we broke the curse in the first dungeon. I already talked about this in detail earlier on in this Let's Play, but that night curse really should have lasted longer in order for it to actually affect me. Because while it did leave some bad memories for people in the game, as I found out as I traveled along, the curse wasn't there long enough to affect me. It was just, okay, well, that takes care of that. It was just anticlimactic, the way that I broke it so early in the game. Plus, considering it was Loki's plan to spread darkness in the world, it would have made sense to have the night last longer. And then there's the other weather effects. They really had no purpose. I mean, a few of them did. Like I said, the night curse, if it wasn't for the night curse, there wouldn't have been a game. The dark in the sky served as a way for us to realize that the chaos have arrived in Lake Countryside. And I guess the snow was sort of a thing because it was mentioned one time in one cutscene. But here's the thing. There were no lasting effects. Once the curse came and went, the curse might have as well have not been there to begin with. They didn't do anything. What's even weirder is that aside from the curses that I just mentioned, nobody even talked about them, which would make sense for like snow. And well, actually it wouldn't make sense for snow, because snow is the one thing that people were waiting for, and yet the only time it was mentioned was in that one cutscene. But rain, the thunderstorm, I imagine the world has thunderstorms as like normal, so nobody would talk about that. But the red sky, the blood red sky, that can't be normal. You would think that there'd be at least one person talking about that. But pretty much, yeah, that's my biggest problem with the game right there, is that the curses, the weather curses, really didn't do anything. Now, onto something I did like. I liked the sense of mystery that the game was given as we travel from place to place, just trying to figure out what was going on. Of course, it's not perfect. The problem with it was the mystery lasted a bit too long. I mean, there came a point where even the characters in the game were getting tired of the wild goose chase we were being sent on. But once the mystery was solved though, boy was it solved. There was like tons of information being given to us. The fact that there was this Oberkotter guy who discovered the truth about the universe. The fact that ancient chaos were spreading lies about the nature of the universe, because I don't know why, but that was still pretty interesting. In fact, that was my favorite plot twist there, the whole thing with the chaos spreading the lies in ancient history. And then of course there was the fact that Loki coming around and spreading darkness to, I'm not entirely sure what his goal was. He wanted to experience a balanced world, but he was spreading darkness here. Was he releasing darkness from his world so that balance could enter his world or something? But that was interesting too. Definitely interesting that the main villain didn't just have causing chaos in mind, he wanted to experience balance, which was an interesting motive for a villain. Next comes the characters. The characters were interesting. The human characters in particular probably had the most notable and memorable personalities. We had Hrothgar, who was kind of the reluctant hero in the whole thing. We had Lester, who really wanted to make things right in the world and was probably the anchor in the entire team. And we had Ariel, who was kind of emo actually, she had this sense of hopelessness about her. The animal characters kind of had their own personalities as well, but they didn't really show as much. Jakala, of course, was knowledgeable about the Void, and Aquila was knowledgeable about Oberkotter, but that's really all they supplied was knowledge. And Chanticleer was just there. We were going to the Tower of Odin, and he's like, "Oh, hey, you're going to the Tower of Odin? Sure, I'll come along." And that was that. So Chanticleer was probably the weakest character of the lot. I was definitely glad to have him, though. I mean, partly because he's a bird man, but more importantly, he brought with him some spells that I found really useful. Which brings me to gameplay. Starting off, I didn't like the breakable walls. In fact, it would take quite a game on RPG Maker 3 for me to like the breakable walls. The problem with the breakable walls on RPG Maker 3 is they're too hidden. They don't stand out very well. I mean, if you come in at just the right angle, you will notice that something about one spot on the wall is different than the rest, but generally you wind up passing them up. In fact, you saw that I passed up several while playing this game, and in a few times I didn't find a breakable wall until a return visit to a place. So there really needed to be some sort of clues that they were there. Like in the second dungeon, there was a sign pointing to a breakable wall. I'm not saying they all have to be that obvious, but a little hint that something may be off about the area that you're in. Now, about the towns. I really like the town designs. There was a bit too much slowdown at times though, but well, the one town in particular was really bad with a slowdown, but it was tolerable, at least for me, because the towns were really nice to look at and they were nice to explore. My favorite town was probably Eowyn, was it? It was Aquila's hometown, with the lookout platforms being used as houses under construction, or reconstruction as the case may be. I thought that was a clever way to use an object that is meant for people to stand on top of, even though you can't actually have people stand on top of them. RPG Maker 3, what logic it has with some of its stuff. My favorite thing about the towns, aside from looking at them, was the fact that they were filled with treasure chests. I really enjoyed looking around and hunting for the treasure chests in each town. And some of them have some pretty good hiding places. Like, I remember in the very first town, there was this one that was behind a building out in the back, and at first I missed it, but then I looked over there and it's like, oh hey, there's one, and I felt a sense of reward for finding it. And the treasure chests made exploring towns really enjoyable. In fact, there aren't many games out there that have treasure chests in town, so kudos to you for doing that. Now, speaking of towns, I gotta bring this up again. It would have been really nice had I been able to swap party members wherever I wanted, or in towns as the case may be. Now, I went into the detail just recently in episode 31 of this, where how you could have had a little house where you swap party members, but the fact that I could only choose a party member 3 times in the game was not good. Not to mention that the first 2 times, I'm pretty much going to switch to a specific person anyway just to try that person out, and then the third time was just who I want to bring into the final dungeon, once I've learned the other 3 characters. What bothers me even more is that I could only choose the animal characters. Hrothgar, Ariel, and Lester with permanent parties were they were always going to be in my party. I couldn't swap out any of them and have a party of mostly animals if I wanted to. I imagine that was because it would have been complicated scripting it to allow me to choose anybody, but still. Now I want to talk about equipment next. This is something I haven't mentioned before. I think the equipment needed better boost to attack power. It seemed like between each town and each level of equipment, it would only difference of 5 attack power, which basically amounts to 5 damage, which doesn't amount to much. I think it would have been better had they been 10 points apart instead. Now, some equipment had boosts against certain enemy types, but I didn't really pay attention to that much. I'm sure that the idea was perhaps I'm in an area with a specific enemy type, and then going to a weapon 5 points weaker wouldn't be so bad if it meant I'd cause double damage against certain enemies, but I didn't really pay attention to that. That's not your fault, that's entirely mine and RPG Maker 3's, because RPG Maker 3's elemental system is not entirely straightforward. And as for armor, the amount that they boosted your defense was negligible by the end of the game. I mean, like, my most powerful piece of armor was the Holy Armor. That was the ultimate armor, and it only amounted to 10 points less damage. Of course, there was that accessory that boosted all of my stats by 25, now that was something. My favorite piece of equipment would have to be the Silver Ring. It's the one that boosted everybody, not everybody's, but whoever wore it got to attack 1.5 times more often, pretty much. And you can tell I liked it a lot because the moment I got the thing, I pretty much used it through the entire game. I want to bring up a Rana story real quick. That one boosted speed for all the characters as a trait, and I believe the idea was to make battles in RPG Maker 3 go a little faster if the battle gauges went up faster. But I like the idea of using equipment to do that better, because you can actually see the difference when you wear one, especially if not everybody in the party is wearing one, which is the case for pretty much me through the entire game. I had Hrothgar and Ariel attacking way more often than everybody else, and that made it so much more noticeable, and that made it so much more enjoyable, because I knew that extra boost in speed was really nice. Then there are the subquests. I like the subquests. The rewards especially were nice, like the one that boosted all the stats by 25 points. There was also that item that basically turned off random encounters. That's definitely nice. But of course they're not perfect. The quests were not perfect. Let's start with the training center. The training center was misleading. I mean, you go in there, it's called the training center, and you're fighting holograms, and yet if you lose, you're dead, and it's game over. It's a good thing you had a save point in that place, but some people might not think to use the save point. They're going to think, oh, this is a training center, I don't really need to save, and then they'll die, and my gosh. Also, I think it would have been better had there been some sort of reward for each rank, because the way it was handled, I go in and fight the first round and I get nothing, and I had to come back later, fight again, get nothing, and then it's not until late in the game when I come back again that I finally get a reward. I might as well have just skipped the training center the entire game and only entered it whenever I got to the end. So it would have been nice had there been some sort of reward for the lower 2 ranks. I think a Run and Story did a little better, because that gave you a reward for each of its ranks. The quiz in Santarte, I already mentioned this before multiple times. I really shouldn't have had just the one chance to get it right, or else I don't get any reward. Especially when there's no way I'm going to even know the answers the first time I go there. I mean, it would have been nice to have a second chance, or better yet, a chance to just decline answering the question until you're more prepared. And of course, there's the sign in the Worm Cave. Like I said before, when I went up to that sign and it did nothing, I thought it was glitched. I mean, it would have been nice had it said at least, come back later or something like that, because in what game does a sign do nothing? Don't answer that. And here's another thing that I haven't mentioned before. The fact that I had to return to Sant Arte to complete all these quests and collect my rewards. By the time I got through the Fire Temple, and especially when I reached the Northlands, I didn't want to trek all the way back to Sant Arte in order to get this stuff. Had the rewards been given to me more locally to where I completed the quests, maybe I would have found it more worthwhile to get them, like the item that let me run from battles. If that sign had been placed more conveniently to where I didn't have to backtrack a whole ways to get it, not to mention the fact that I didn't know that I was supposed to do anything with it, I probably could have had that item a whole lot earlier than the end of the game. At the very least though, I did enjoy the rewards. Now the next thing I want to talk about is the way level ups were handled. Levels could have been handled better. First off, I'm not really a fan of leveling up through only the story, but that's just a personal preference, partly because the three RPG Maker games that I played all use the story-based leveling. The battles don't give experience. A Ronin story, it was story-based. This game, it was story-based. Even the sample game of RPG Maker 3, it was story-based. I think there were a couple games on RPG Maker 3 I played where you did actually level up through battles, but they were so long ago I can't really remember for certain. Now, what really should have been improved though with the level ups, what really should have been done, was let me know they happened. There were several points in the game where I finished the boss fight and continuing forth without being aware that I leveled up, and it wasn't until I reached like the next town or possibly even the next dungeon before I realized, hey, I leveled up. Despite the fact that battles were only worth fighting to get money though, I gotta say I definitely enjoyed them. Largely because of the spells that were given to me. I mean, all the spells I pretty much used a lot. Or at least most of them, up until a certain point, like the status attack spells. I was starting to get worried that they might not come in handy. There might be enemies and bosses immune to them, but overall I definitely found myself using them often, especially against bosses. Like whenever I tried to poison or slow down bosses, that was definitely fun. On that note, I am definitely glad that you allowed me to cause status effects to bosses. It was fun giving myself the advantage, especially on a boss that would have been pretty difficult otherwise. That said, there were times where doing that actually made things a bit easier, mainly with critical hits. There were too many bosses that were stunned by critical hits. I don't know why the people who made RPG Maker 3 decided that when you get a critical hit, it stuns the enemy, but too many of the bosses I was able to stun with a critical hit. I would have had maybe 3 or 4 bosses in the entire game that you could stun. Another thing I liked about the spells was the ones that hit all the enemies in battle. They really helped the battles go a lot faster. In fact, that's the main thing I like about the spells. That they did help me get through the battles a lot easier. With RPG Maker 3's battle system, a slow battle just isn't good. You want to go through the battles fast, and the spells in this game definitely helped you get through the battles fast, especially with how powerful they were. I am definitely glad that the spells were often more powerful than just a regular attack. It made me more encouraged to use them more often. Alright, the next thing. The next thing isn't specifically about the game, it's actually about the guide. The guide was incomplete. It only listed 2 abilities per monster, and because of that, I went in thinking that that's all you could have was 2 traits per monster. But after that Loki fight, I decided to do a little looking into stuff, and it turns out that enemies have a lot more than just those 2 traits. It includes 2 offensive abilities like Drain HP, 2 defensive abilities like Anti-Status, a special trait like Auto Recovery, and a weakness. The reason this is a problem, the way that the guide only lists 2 of these traits at a time, is with Loki. Loki's information only listed that he could drain HP and drain MP. It didn't mention the auto recovery, and more importantly, it didn't mention the fact that he is immune to status effects. So when I went into battle and looked at the guide and it only mentioned that he drained stuff, I of course thought that maybe I could poison him, so I spent the majority of the battle using my weak poison spells, and that's why the battle wound up taking so long. What it made it more confusing is that some bosses did mention in the guide that they were immune to status effects, so of course I'd be confused with Loki. So you really should have mentioned all of the traits instead of just sticking with just 2, which I'm not entirely sure why you just stuck with 2. On an unrelated note, I'd like to make a suggestion. The game only uses 80% of the available space. You could have used that extra space to add some extra things, like maybe add more scenery to dungeons. Like, I know you had some dungeons with a bit of scenery, like the first dungeon. It had a few pots and crates sitting in corners. And Oberkater's place, he had a bunch of chairs and tables with books on them. But I mean places like the lava cave. That place was empty, so you probably could have used the extra memory to add a little bit more scenery to the place. Granted, I'm not entirely sure what RPG Maker 3 supplies as cave-worthy scenery. I'm pretty sure though there's I know one object is like this crater that has smoke coming out of it. I don't know if that's available within a dungeon, but you could have used that for like the lava cave. And then there's a couple other dungeons that were pretty empty that could have used a bit of sprucing. Could have used a bit of sprucing up. On that note, I really like what you did with the shelter, the second shelter, the one that got attacked by the chaos. What with all the bones and other remains lying around the ground, really gave a great sense of... And I had the word in my head until about 2 seconds ago. Anyway, really like what you did there. It's a great way to add scenery to a dungeon. Alternatively, maybe that extra data could have been used for an extra optional quest. Preferably one that didn't require returning to Sant Arde. Finally, I gotta talk about the ending. I am sorry to say that the ending was disappointing. I mean, it was kind of interesting with the question of morals, but it wasn't enough. First off, half the team wasn't included. You should never exclude any party members from the ending of a video game. Even Paper Mario includes all of their characters in the ending, and half the characters have no purpose in the story. But the fact that you didn't include any of the animal characters in the ending of your game just gave the impression that they weren't important. And the thing was, they were. I mean, maybe not Chanticleer, but Jakala certainly, because we went to his town and helped him defend his town against Chaos Storm, and Aquila? If it weren't for Aquila, we would have never found out about Oberkater to begin with, so they really should have been in the ending somehow. Like, maybe they could have reflected on the nature of the universe or something, which would actually be kind of clever in a way, because they're animals, so of course they would think about nature. But I mean, like, what do they do with the knowledge that the void is a lie? And what about in the future, when the next Light in the Sky happens, the next Oberkater cluster? I mean, it makes sense for the animal characters to reflect on that, because they were the ones really interested in this, in the state of the universe and all that in the story, so yeah. Anyway, despite the game's flaws, A Light in the Sky is definitely a game that I enjoyed. In fact, I would recommend it to anybody who is looking for a good RPG Maker game, an RPG Maker 3 game to play. It's definitely recommended. It was fun. I enjoyed myself. In fact, the fact that I enjoyed the battles even is just saying something. This is RPG Maker 3 we're talking about. It has one of the worst battle systems of all time, and I enjoyed it. Enough that I didn't care that the battles didn't give experience. I didn't care that they only got me gold. I mean, that's how I wound up being probably the richest person in the game with so much money that I had no way of ever spending it all. I went out and purposely fought the battles even though I never really had to. In fact, I should just try beating Loki with Chanticleer just for the fun of it. In fact, you know what? I'm going to do that. Tomorrow, the final episode of Let's Play Alina Sky, in which I beat Loki with Chanticleer in my party. I'll see you then.